I am not a bent-over woman. Now, it's true, I struggle a little bit with my posture. When I was a teenager, my mother always used to say to me, "Janet, stand up straight." Did any of your mothers say that to you? So I try to remember every now and then to straighten up and pull my shoulders back, engage my core muscles, and I envy those of you who have perfect posture. However, the other day, I had to complete a writing assignment for an ecumenical cross-cultural program I'm involved in that has a long name. It's called the Spiritual and Theological Mutual Accompaniment Project. It includes people from the U.S., Mexico, and Peru who have been walking together for 3 years in a unique journey of solidarity and vulnerability. Mostly, we share our stories with one another, and then we reflect on them theologically. Finally, we talk about how we wish to act in the world differently as a result of our journey together. Well, in my first writing assignment for this year's cycle, I shared a story of trying to help a young man who had come to this church seeking some assistance. His fiancée was seriously ill and disabled, and he was out of jail just recently and still on probation. As he began to launch into his story, he said, "Please don't judge me." And somehow that really touched my heart. He confessed that he had been involved in drugs, but he really wanted to be there for his fiancée and get his life together. And unlike many who come through our doors, he had just 2 simple asks. He needed bus passes because while he could walk all over Portland, his disabled fiancée could not. And they really needed a tent. Well, I decided to call my next appointment and tell him I was going to be a little late, so thanks to Bill Kunitz for his patience on that. And I took this man over to the TriMet office in Pioneer Square to get him a couple of bus passes. And I spoke with Kara, our business manager, who immediately said, "I have a tent. Tell him to come back tomorrow, and I'll bring him my tent." It was a rare, heartwarming moment when we could actually help a human being with a concrete, immediate, modest need, thanks to our pastor's discretionary fund and Kara's personal generosity. Well, in my reflection on this experience, I wrote, "I see people like this man every day in and around the church. The city park blocks around our church in the downtown arts district are a playground for the affluent and a home for the homeless. Here, suffering and life, pain and hope reside side by side. And as a pastor in this context, I'm grateful for the opportunity to minister in a context where the tensions and oppressions of our society are not just hidden away from view, but I also regularly feel helpless. I regularly feel that I'm only offering Band-Aids, not real solutions. I don't have the training, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. I feel like I am a bundle of lack. And yet, what I do is witness, pray, listen, and try to offer a smile and some encouragement, along with a recognition of these folks' human dignity. Well, this is a part of what I shared with my small group in that first writing assignment. When we were asked about what we see in our daily context. In our second assignment, our coordinator, Juan Carlos Lapuente, whose wife, by the way, was the former director of Emerge. Some of you may know her. Well, he threw me a curveball. He'd been taking notes on what I and others had written about our key theological insights or learnings from the last year. And I had written about liberation last year. I had written that liberation is found in the midst of our relationships as we seek to live out of our authentic calling and authentic selves in response to the brokenness of the world and the God we know through Jesus. Well, I read this again, and I thought about Juan Carlos's challenge to help me relate this understanding of liberation that I'd come up with to this story I have told about this man with a very specific need. And I have to admit that when I reread my definition of liberation, I thought, gee, that sounds awfully academic and awfully big. I was stumped. I can see compassion in this story. I can see charity in this story, but liberation? That felt like a stretch. I thought about all the economic, cultural, medical, political, and social systems that had combined to make a hash out of this young couple's lives. I felt the inadequacy of what I and the church could do in this moment, and I felt weighed down. And I realized that I feel like this a lot as I face all the challenges that the world is throwing at us these days. So maybe I am a little bent over. What about you? Do you ever feel bent over by the weight of the world or by your own private struggles? In his essay, The Black Art of Escape, Casey Gerald talks about his journey from poverty to wealth and fame, and how even reaching the heights of success failed to make him a truly free black man. And so he decided to disappear, to become invisible, to deconstruct his life and start over. And he tells this story in that essay, The Black Art of Escape, which I highly recommend reading because I cannot do justice to it in this sermon. He discovered in his own life that the most radical thing a person can do, especially people who belong to marginalized groups in our society, is to be well. To be well. So he says now he meditates. And he does other things. He goes to therapy, he eats well, he gets sleep and all of that. But he says that as most of us who've tried to meditate have experienced, at first that can just put us more in touch with our burdens. He writes, the yogi says, when you are able to sit, the whole universe will come with folded hands and serve you. But he says, while you wait for the whole universe to come, the whole world comes in its place, demanding a response, demanding action, demanding sorrow, tears, and blood. Can you relate? Jesus wanted people to be well. Have you ever noticed how much of Jesus' activity in the Gospels is focused on healing people? Actually healing people. Not just offering spiritual comfort or mental release, but real embodied physical, psychic, spiritual healing. Because Jesus came to liberate the whole person. And we are, all of us, physical, psychic, spiritual beings. Now, as Westerners who, by and large, don't believe in miracles, we usually get stuck on this question of Jesus' physical healings. Did they or did they not really happen? But what may have mattered even more to the people at that time was the way in which he restored them as social and religious beings. When Jesus touched that bent-over woman, he reached across a chasm that had been created by contemporary understandings of Jewish law. Not the only understandings, but the predominant understanding in that time. And he initiated a marvelous exchange. He took on that woman's uncleanness, which had come to her because of her illness. And he restored her to ritual purity and therefore enabled her to participate fully in her familial, social, and religious life. By making her well, he made her free. In her commentary on this story, Sharon Ring says, "The phrase daughter of Abraham is found only here in all the Gospels. The masculine parallel, sons of Abraham, appears in many places to describe the people of God and specific individuals. But here, this woman is named daughter of Abraham. She is brought from the margins to the heart of her people." But you know what? I bet that Jesus often felt inadequate. The people who recognized him as God's Messiah were expecting so much more. Sure, he healed some people, but did he chase the Romans out of Israel? No. Did he overthrow the tyrants Herod and Pilate? No. Did he restore the Davidic monarchy to Israel? Did he? No. Well, what use is a Messiah like that? That's what a lot of people thought then and probably now. Well, when I met with my small group from this theological accompaniment project online last week to discuss our second writings, we shared an aha moment. One of my colleagues, in reflecting on what I wrote and what one of the other men in my group wrote, she said, I think maybe we get trapped in this westernized understanding of liberation. Like it's got to be really big. It's not liberation unless it's the defeat of Hitler or the fall of the Berlin Wall or something really big and dramatic. But what if most of the time, she said, liberation is found in small moments, in acts of kindness and compassion, of seeing the image of God in another person, which makes all the difference to that one. Angel, a queer theologian from Mexico City in my group, came up with a great term for this: micro-liberation. In the midst of these monstrous structures that chew up human life, what if we could celebrate micro-liberation wherever we found it, in the midst of life's uncertainties? When Jesus set a woman free, who had been captive to what the Bible literally calls, if you translate the Greek, a spirit of weakness, that was everything to her. It gave her her life back. But in the context of first century Palestine, what was this? It was a micro-liberation. but it mattered. Seeing it, we're told all his opponents were put to shame, and all those in the crowd rejoiced at all the extraordinary things he was doing. Do you see the ripple effect of that? We don't know the rest of the story, but what ripple effect did that micro-liberation have on her children, her spouse, supposing she had one, her wider community, her synagogue, and maybe on that synagogue leader once he had a chance to think about it a little more. Well, what does your version of micro-liberation look like? What would make you able to stand up straight again? What would enable you to be truly made well? In an interview on NPR's Here and Now, which is how I stumbled on to Gerald Casey last week, he says, if you want to be woke, you've got to be well. There's no enlightened being in the history of the world who doesn't say that the inner self being free is a primary condition for the outer world experiencing freedom. And that's why he said there's a third way he wants to offer black folk. And by extension, I hope he would be okay with my saying, the rest of us can take a page from this as well. And that is, one way of liberation is to buckle down, work hard, and struggle your way out of the morass you're in. The second way is to rise up and resist. But the third way is to take flight, to be well, to withdraw on occasion for your own micro-liberation. One of his friends, a black theologian in Atlanta, who he describes as on the brink of disintegration from white supremacy and capitalism, well, she began to nap. And she told him, naps really saved my life. And so she started a nap ministry. Seriously. And now she spreads the good news of the nap ministry. And let me tell you, I believe in this good news. I am a practitioner of naps. So I particularly appreciated this part. She wrote to him that our dream space has been stolen and we want it back. Naps are reparations. So the next time the world comes demanding action, demanding sorrow, tears, and blood, Gerald says, don't take the bait. Yes, we need to do our civic duty. We need to vote. We need to weep with those who weep. But I say to you, our God does not require human sacrifice. That is not what our God is about. Jesus practiced true Sabbath keeping by making it clear that human wholeness is a form of godliness. So claim your micro-liberation and spread the good news. Take a nap. The world will still be there when you awaken. Amen.